Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome along to this week's Better Managers Briefing. I'm Matt Roberts, I'm the Director of Membership here at the CMI, and today I'm delighted to have as my guest Valerie Dias. Valerie is a non-executive director with a number of organisations. Valerie is on the board of Hastings Insurance, Aston Lark Insurance Brokers, Elavon Financial Service, and most recently has taken up a role on the board of Monzo Bank. Valerie has also just completed a stint on the CMI Board of Trustees, where she chaired our Finance and Audit Committee. Valerie, it's great to have you with us, and thanks for giving us your time today.
Thank you, Matt.
So today we're going to take a look at the way in which the pandemic has forced us to change the way in which we think about risk management. And this is an area of particular expertise for you, Valerie. So we're looking forward to having your insights today as we discuss this. I wonder if we could start by just having a bit of a think about how did the start of the pandemic, in your view, impact on the boards that you sit on, their view of organizational risk?
So almost overnight, practically every organization had to start to think differently. Any business continuity plan or any business resumption plan that organizations had in place did not really cater for the world having to change the way it had to for a sustained period of time. And with that came various challenges, but also opportunities that presented itself in this very changing environment. So some of the top risks, in no particular order, that I observed were, and still are, people risk, revenue sustainability, capital and liquidity risks, operational resilience, conduct risk, customer harm, and fraud risk. So let me pick a couple just to give you a bit of a flavor. So people risk, for example. Overnight, we all were working from home. And some home environments were, and still are, not very conducive to working comfortably. And others are not, of course. But both from a physical and mental perspective. So motivating teams and working differently, ensuring people had regular breaks, that they were communicated with, and they were supported through this very long and arduous period. And they continue to be trained and developed, both for their performance and their development, particularly more junior members of staff. And some people starting new jobs, how do they do this? Usually you do all very face-to-face working in an office environment. So a lot had changed and you had to adapt accordingly. Operational resilience, again, all our processes, our policies, our systems to ensure robustness of our servers, of access control, particularly in the face of cybersecurity, business continuity, etc. All of that needed to be addressed. And let's not forget, every business has needed to survive. So management and boards had to be focused on the short as well as the medium term, which had quite a lot of changes and adaptability that had to be made, depending on the type of industry. So on a very simplistic level, for example, if you take the travel or the hospitality and entertainment industries, they pretty much came to a standstill. But it also had the challenges of keeping staff, in some cases furloughing them with government support, but they still had costs. So costs of rental, of their buildings, of their planes, whatever it is. So the costs were still there and they had to manage this and juggle it. So liquidity and capital. So there was a lot of the main risks were still there, but they changed in the way they were then manifesting itself.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And you rightly pointed out, there's a whole plethora of various risks that in many cases became sort of more of an issue for organizations because of the pandemic, and the sort of risk profile changed very quickly and overnight. You touched within the discussion just a moment ago about the people risk and the way in which moving to mass working from home across many sectors delivered more of a risk. What was your sort of view on that in the initial sort of period, and has your sort of approach to that changed over the course of the pandemic as we've learned more?
So I think I was amazed by how all the boards I sit on, I think the organization, the executives and the managers really focused on their people, how to make them comfortable and to help them to adapt to the new environment. We've all had challenges, whether it is with the Wi-Fi or the fiber optic broadband or whatever it is. We've all had those challenges, and so it's to help people adapt. Everyone was given a laptop or a desktop at home, a different chair to work for, but equally, not all the home environments were adapted or can be adapted for a sustained period of time. So we do need to think about people's mental health as much as their physical health. And again, I've been very amazed by how managers and the executives have thought about their people and tried to ensure they've had one-to-ones, they've had team meetings, other sessions to help build that. Because, you know, in the past, certainly as a board director, I would have those, I suppose, a coffee in the breaks and have a chat with people who are not board members or not executives. And you get a sense of the culture and how people are functioning, where there are concerns, where there's the added stresses. And now you don't have that because we're all working remotely. And so it has been, people risk has been at the forefront of most organizations, and I think have, for most part, handled it well.
Okay. And any sort of feeling about new risks that have emerged as part of the recent past?
Yes, of course. Well, a lot of the same risks are there, but I think they again manifest themselves differently. We have all hunkered down and gone into short-term management of our business plans, how to deal with the here and now, particularly those industries where they've had a revenue shortfall. And so they've either had to shrink their costs or furlough staff and therefore not do various activities that they would normally do, or take some shortcuts. With that come added risks of security, cyber crime, fraud risks. And so those have sort of taken a little bit more center stage, where in the past you might have had better controls. So it's managing all of those certainly are an added challenge.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, I mean, I guess it you know, those are some of the natural sort of outcomes of having to prioritize short-term, here and now sort of actions. And just with that in mind, I wonder, from the point of view of yourself and other board members that you serve alongside, has your expectations of the way in which the executive in those businesses manage risk changed as a result of this pandemic?
Certainly, it continues to be a priority. That said, I think this is the new normal, and this is and while it might change the way we work, and maybe there'll be a hybrid model where people might come back into work or work from home, I think we have to continue to run our businesses. And so it's now been 15-16 months of us being in this environment, and people have got used to it, to managing and juggling all of these different types of risks that have emerged, as well as the old types of risks, and found different ways to mitigate them. But we have to now look forward to our medium-term business plans and longer-term business plans, and work through what might be the new normal.
Yeah, so starting to instill a bit of a sense of a longer-term sort of view again of where businesses are going is going to be imperative. And you touched just a moment ago on the way in which, certainly in the UK, we're starting to sort of get more and more businesses moving towards sort of hybrid arrangements, where some staff are on site or in offices and others remaining at home. And there'll be all sorts of new dynamics, I think, that emerge for businesses and for leaders of those businesses through that hybrid model. Any views that you've started to form on the risks that are associated with hybrid working?
Yeah, and with hybrid working, which is a good thing, because I think, we always have to evolve. I think the main thing is to help for managers and executives and boards to help people develop their potential. And we're going to have to think about how we do that, because while we might have had lots of face-to-face time with others, with our staff in the past, and in particularly younger people coming through who might need a bit more FaceTime with each other. Now we're going to have to do this differently, and we must consider how best we can do it. We also have to consider their mental health, because while many of us have infrastructure around us of other people and other distractions, if you're an introvert, or you're working alone at home and you don't have those interactions with others, we do need to consider all of those things. And so I think, well, my personal preference is getting people back into the office at least once or twice a week, so that they do actually interact with others. You also get ideas from talking to other people. And so, you know, and you generate a greater level of discussion than you might do at the end of a phone. And motivation is another thing that managers have to consider, how they're going to do it, how you're going to measure performance. So all of that will come into it, because we'll have to start thinking differently.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Okay, so I guess you know, you touched a moment ago on the way in which boards are now starting to expect the executive to start thinking a bit more medium to longer term again. And so I guess as part of that, there are reflections that are starting to emerge on, well, what have we learned about risk management over the sort of pandemic period thus far? I just wonder if you've got any reflections, Valerie, in terms of lessons learned and that you think will have a role in the future.
Well, you know, I don't think in the past, certainly in my executive career, we did lots of business continuity testing, and it was pretty one-dimensional, because we thought there'd be one site that would go down or one server that would go down. But we saw over the last 15 months, just about everything changed, and it changed overnight. So while we have to continue doing a lot of this testing and thinking about risks around us, we also have had to adapt on a multi-dimensional level. And so it is the new norm. We have to then just think about how well we've done it. And for most of us, we have done it well, particularly businesses that have worked through this period. But we also have to consider how, when we work with third parties and we have outsourced arrangements, they may well have been impacted differently to us. And so how do we ensure the sustainability of our own businesses going forward? Because once we come out of this pandemic, we will find that there will be some that will fall by the wayside, that will not have had sufficient capital or liquidity, or they will have had to make their staff redundant and to start up afresh. You know, some of them might just fall by the wayside, or maybe it may take a different form. And if we are reliant on them, then we need to consider what our different points of failure might be.
Absolutely. Okay, so look, I'm going to ask you one more question, if I may, before we go to live questions from our audience. I know there's plenty of people watching who'll want to post questions to you on this subject, Valerie. If you are watching and you've got a question, then please do type it into the chat box on your screen, and we'll get through as many of those questions as we can before we finish the session today. But just one more from me. Really interested to understand your view, Valerie, in terms of some of the things that maybe managers and risk managers should be looking to address differently going forward. And on the subject, for example, of ESG, will boards be expecting ESG to be more prominently featuring now on risk registers and so forth?
So let me start by saying that ESG is not just about risk management. So it's about businesses managing with strong awareness about their culture, about the environment, social and governance. So this is about businesses doing the right thing, but businesses having it in their DNA. So let's say governance, because everyone talks about ESG and relates it to climate. But let's talk about governance. This is how we ensure we pay our our people appropriately, that we have the right level of diversity and inclusion in our DNA, in our organization, that we have robust internal controls, that our board structure is balanced, that ethics and culture are sound and feature center stage, and we have zero tolerance on bribery and corruption. So it's very much about looking at our business and making sure that all the things we do are under this banner of ESG. So under social, for example, is the Modern Slavery Act. And we all have a statement on our websites about what we do to ensure that we're not condoning it, and we ensure that our third parties that we use don't use child labor, for example. So I think it's and then it's making sure that we have all of this information either publicly stated, either on our website, that we report accordingly, that we have in our annual report. So, and of course, if we don't, and we've got gaps, that's where it's the risk management or the risk exposure. And what are we doing about it to mitigate it? So so ESG is certainly something that, will feature on our risk registers in the short term while we get our act together. And there certainly are plans for larger organizations to have it implemented in terms of the reporting by 2022, and then smaller ones by 25. So we have to get our act together, and it's a bit like the GDPR of 3-4 years ago, where we all thought we had a long time frame to get this done, but there was a lot of work to be done to get both the controls in place and the reporting in place, and similarly the ESG.
So embedding across the business is making sure that the business lives and breathes against those values is what we're really trying to encourage over time. Great, thank you. So look, we'll go as promised to questions from the audience now. And the first question today comes from Dan. Hi, Dan, and thank you. And Dan asks, do you think that pre-pandemic risk registers were generally short-sighted?
Hi, Dan. Well, they're short-sighted. I think you know what you know, and you develop plans and processes to mitigate against those exposures of what you know. I suspect we also have in our memories, things that we are in our lifetime. So, for example, world wars, the Second World War is pre most of our lifetimes, and therefore we perhaps didn't consider some of the types of risks that could affect us, as in this pandemic, where the entire world practically felt the same sort of types of issues. I certainly am culpable from when I ran a risk organization, a Visa, that we didn't test as if the entire system would go down, that everybody would have to work from home and not be able to travel to either our workplace or a different site. So yes, of course, but our plans were probably fit for purpose for what we thought we knew.
Indeed. Okay, thank you. So next question comes from Erica, and she asks, has the pandemic and also other recent trade complications led to a new approach to risk management, for example, moving away from just-in-time supply chains and so forth?
Hi, Erica. Yeah, you're right. We have to think both more broadly and longer term. So yes, there have been lots of organizations have been caught short, but having suppliers who have either fallen by the wayside, have had to stop working over this pandemic, and then have found that they've been in trouble as a consequence. So I think having different layers and multiple outsourced arrangements and backup is another part of the risk management framework that we do need to think through as both part of our medium and longer term plans.
Absolutely. Okay, Matt has sent a question in, and he references the fact that earlier on, Valerie, when you were talking about the various types of risks that organizations need to be prepared for, you mentioned the risk of customer harm and he'd be really interested just to hear a few more of your thoughts on what that looks like, please.
Right. So I do sit on a couple of bank boards, and of course, customers have had problems with their paychecks not coming in on time, with they've been furloughed, they've had less resources, and we've had to be very careful and considerate about thinking about them and the consequences of them as well. And so conduct risk and customer harm in that context for me has been certainly front of mind. Because it's very easy to say, let's switch them off and switch off their accounts if they're not being able to, if they've gone into a significant overdraft, for example, or an unplanned overdraft. But actually, you have to think about the consequences on them and their families. So it was in that context that I was thinking about. Also, there are other industries. So I also sit on the boards of a couple of insurance companies. And again, customer harm in that context of insurance and how they are able to, if something has gone wrong in the house, how can we help them to sort it out as quickly as possible without causing them additional distress.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Okay, thank you. So Katie asks, Katie says, Valerie, you mentioned the importance of having a good board structure, and she asked, how would you define a good board structure?
That's an interesting point. So I think you have a board which is made up of both executive and non-executive directors. And the executive directors are typically the CEO and one other, could be the CFO, the CRO, or the CTO. The non-executive directors, you do need to get a good balance of both male and female, of people with the right level of expertise that can contribute and support and advise the organization effectively. You need a very strong chair to help balance the debate and the discussions that happen at the board, and to be able to summarize and be fairly directive to the executive. But you do need to have people who have the right backgrounds, whether it's in finance, risk, marketing, product, to be able to support the organization and be the face of the organization. Because ultimately the responsibility is with the board.
Indeed, absolutely. And that, not only that variety of expertise, but also, I guess, the variety of thinking, the way in which people sort of approach a solution or a problem, I guess, is important. Okay, a really thought-provoking question from Stephen. And Stephen asks, in your view, do poor managers hide behind risk avoidance rather than risk management, thus adversely affecting the performance of their organization?
That is entirely possible. I think, I much prefer the phrase risk awareness. And I think every manager needs to be risk aware rather than avoid risk. Because if you avoid risk, you can actually kill the business. So you need to be able to manage the business with a great degree of risk awareness. And then you need to help the experts, either in the first line or the second line, to help mitigate and run some parameters around those the risks you have, so that if you actually are straying too far, you can be brought back in line with those experts around you, whether it's in the systems or the products, and having the right level of milestones or the metrics to measure those. But if you try and avoid a risk, you will never actually launch a product or a service.
I guess sort of implicit in there as well is the sort of almost the risk appetite that a board may have. What's your sort of experiences around that?
I think having an enlightened board with a good level of risk appetite, where the strategy allows you to have much bigger level of risk, to a zero tolerance on compliance or regulatory matters. So you can have a whole range of how do you manage your risk. You certainly wouldn't want to do anything that would be illegal, so that you have zero tolerance on that. And then you'd have a wider level of allowing certain risks to go forward, provided you've got the right metrics in place to be able to measure it and to be able to then rein it in when it needs to.
Absolutely. Okay, I think we've probably got time for one or two more questions before we finish today. We've had a question from Jaden, and Jaden asks, what's the best approach to risk management that you've seen on boards that you've served on, and why?
Gosh, I think an enlightened risk management approach. So I think you do need to have a framework in place where you've got everyone understands their responsibilities. You have a risk appetite, that you have the metrics in place, you have people thinking about it, it's in their DNA. It's really important that every person in the organization understands their responsibilities and their approach to risk. And it could be everything from the IT to the products to data privacy and data protection to understand reputational risk. So there's a whole awareness that needs to happen, but it starts from the top. And if the executives don't believe in it, you're never going to get the rest of the organization to buy into it.
Great advice. Okay, so last question for today comes from Dale, and Dale asks, how do you see the approach to risk changing over the next few years?
I think we have to adapt to the situations, and we have to, regulation, for example, is going to drive quite a lot of the way we manage our risks. But we also have to adapt because the environment has changed, as we've seen over the last 16 months. And so we need to just be conscious and risk aware about everything we do so that we can then be flexible and make changes to our environment as we need to.
Valerie, thank you very much for all of your insights today. You've covered off some really broad questions actually there from our audience. So thank you everybody that posed those questions to Valerie. And again, thank you, Valerie, for your insights. If you're not already a member of CMI, then please do take a look at the link in the chat where you can find out more about what we do and what we can offer to you. I'd really encourage you to join us, and hopefully we'll welcome you into our community very quickly. We'll be back next Friday with another Better Managers briefing. And Valerie, once again, many thanks for today, and have a great weekend, everybody, as and when it arrives.
Thanks, Matt.